Hey folks, welcome. So glad you're here. We're gonna give like a 1-minute grace period and then we'll get started. In the meantime, we'd love to hear where you're calling in from. So introduce yourself in the chat. What brings you to this work and what brings you to the session? What are you hoping to learn today? Hey folks, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. Where are you calling in from? What are you hoping to learn and hear about today? And we will get started momentarily. Hi, Tanya. Hi, Bren. Great to have you on the line. Folks, keep introducing yourself. In the meantime, I'm going to get us started. I'm so thrilled to welcome you all to our third in this webinar series, Words Open Worlds, Supporting Literacy Through Representative Materials. My name is Shana Levitam. I'm a policy analyst at EdTrust, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this webinar through the Alliance for Resource Equity. As I mentioned, this is the last in our webinar series, so encourage you to check out the first two, the first on empowering families as literacy champions, and the second on supporting older readers. Those are now available on our YouTube. Before we dive into today's session topic, I just want to very quickly share a little bit of context about what brings us to this conversation today and what we mean when we say resource equity. So at EdTrust, we define resource equity as both how much money a district and school has available, but also how well that money, as well as other resources, are used to support strong student experiences. So of course, funding and school supplies, things like that matter, but we take a much larger view of resources, things like students having access to diverse and quality educators, engaging with rigorous and engaging course materials, showing up to school in safe facilities. And so we're thinking not only about adequacy, but also about distribution of that broad sense of resources, making sure that they're available and also distributed to the students in schools and districts that need them the most. And so the Alliance for Resource Equity gives shared language and a set of tools that helps district leaders and advocates do that. We have a toolkit, we do webinars such as this, we do presentations and engage with local advocacy organizations across the country. And so just a bit about our toolkit as well, that's all available on our website. It helps folks kind of understand and assess the state of resource equity in their school and district, as well as ways to pinpoint advocacy actions, how to make the case to district leaders on an advocacy priority, and understand who has like the authority to go through a change to make the policy priority a reality. And then we also host webinars like this to uplift stories of advocates, unpack complex issues in our community, and kind of share practical tools and guidance on topics that are relevant to resource equity and also issue areas that are core to EdTrust's mission. Our agenda for today is to dive into representative and authentic materials and books. And so my colleague, William Roddick, will give some opening remarks and reflections, and then we'll shift into him moderating a panel with folks to share about their works and perspectives. We'll have Q&A at the end, so feel free to use that function as well as like interacting in the chat, reacting to what folks are saying. Questions can go in the Q&A section, but reflections are great in the chat section. So with that, I will turn it over to you, William.
Thank you, Shana. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what is one of the most critical conversations we can have right now about education equity. Let's start with something that we all know. Kids need access to books that reflect a wide range of identities, histories, and experiences. And attaining literacy is about more than learning how to read. It's about seeing yourself in words, understanding your place in the world, and developing critical thinking skills to shape the future. For the advocates on this call, working to ensure that Black, Latine, and low-income students have the resources they need to succeed, we should think about the resources that most directly drive student learning. And that's what's inside the books on classroom shelves and in library collections, and increasingly, whether those books are allowed to be there at all. Right now, we're seeing a coordinated effort to impose Christian white nationalism through public education. Although federal and state governments are framing this push as patriotism, what we are actually seeing is an effort to whitewash history and control whose stories get told in our schools. The scale of this is significant. Since July 2021, there have been over 22,000 cases of book bans across 45 states. Just this past school year alone, 7,000 instances across 23 states and 87 school districts. Florida leads that charge with 2,300 bans. At the same time, despite limitations that are clear in federal law, the current administration is pushing for a shared understanding of our history, where shared means singular and exclusionary. What does this administration not share? Well, certainly any honest discussion about enslavement, about the genocide of indigenous peoples in our country, and the criminalization of civil rights heroes. And that's why the Department of Education Civics Coalition is made up almost entirely of conservative groups, which include Turning Point USA, whose chief education officer stated he is more resolved than ever to advance God-centered, virtuous education. The agenda is playing out across the country, whether it's Florida mandating that instruction about historical atrocities can't cause white students to feel discomfort about their race, or Iowa banning materials on sexual orientation or gender identity through 6th grade. Here's what makes this moment particularly urgent. This is happening at a time when we were already struggling to get meaningful representation into schools and curricula. As research that we've done at EdTrust demonstrates, the books that kids read in school still significantly underrepresent people of color. They often include stereotypes. They present important topics in superficial ways. We developed a tool to help educators assess representational balance in their materials because the problem was just so widespread. And this matters because understanding history is how we understand our present.
William,
example,
I'm so sorry to interject. The way in which we're zooming in on your camera, we can't actually see your face. Are you able to adjust? Perfect. Okay, keep going a little bit.
Over.
Yes.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, is that better?
A little bit more in the direction you were moving.
How's that? Does that work?
Yep, better. If you want to keep moving it, you can, but yes, there, perfect. All right, sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
No, you're good. I was just saying that if how we understand our past is how we understand our present. And for example, if students don't learn about redlining, what explanations are they left with for why neighborhoods are racially segregated? Right? When they don't learn about the deliberate underfunding of schools serving Black and brown students, they're insulted with the fiction that education and resource inequities are somehow natural rather than created by policy choices. Controlling literacy and curriculum has always been a tool of oppression in this country. Anti-literacy laws prohibited Black Americans from learning to read or write. For nearly 100 years after emancipation, literacy tests prevented poor immigrant and formerly enslaved Black Americans from registering to vote. The specifics change, but the pattern remains. Those in power try to control what children learn to maintain inequality. And the censorship that we're seeing is having cascading effects. Almost 80% of teachers surveyed recently report that they've self-censored in class because of fear of pushback or controversy. They say they feel underprepared, unsupported, and increasingly afraid to teach vital material. And most bans aren't the result of formal review processes that school districts have established for evaluating challenge materials. In the early years of these book bans that we saw, just 4% of books went through proper district reconsideration procedures. Instead, what we're seeing is districts removing books preemptively out of fear. Of the book bans influenced by state laws, 97% weren't actually required by those laws. Districts banned them because they were afraid of being out of compliance, even when the laws hadn't passed yet or they'd been blocked by courts. And this is what happens in a climate of fear. And it directly undermines literacy development. When students see themselves in books, their comprehension improves, their engagement deepens, their sense of belonging grows. And the research is clear, but we are seeing books removed from classroom and library shelves because they include LGBTQ+ characters or because they discuss racism. And recent court decisions are threatening the ability of schools to include diverse perspectives in required reading. There is some good news. Most people don't want this. 75% of Americans say teachers should be trusted to make curricular decisions. And majorities across races, across political backgrounds, support teaching the history of racism and its current impacts. But public opinion is not enough. We need advocates working at the state and district level to defend every student's right to see themselves in their curriculum and to learn the full truth of our history. And today, you're going to hear from people doing this work on the ground. Dr. Ashlyn Curry, who works directly with districts to empower families and communities to embrace reading and writing as lifelong passions. Kiera Skipper, who as a teacher and as a school leader, really navigated these curriculum decisions in a very challenging landscape. And Sonover Chigani Wilkins, who is tracking how the censorship movement has evolved from these early book bans that we saw to a broader push for Christian white nationalism in schools. And they're going to share their deep expertise and some concrete steps that you can take as advocates in this moment. So to start, it would be great if each of our panelists could introduce yourself and talk just a little bit about your connection to literacy, to student engagement with text, and the right for students to read.
Hi, everyone. I am Kiera Skipper, Manager of External Relations with the Education Trust in Louisiana. I have worked in schools for almost 15 years as a high school English teacher, instructional leader, and the last 5 years I served as the principal of kindergarten through second grade. So I've had the privilege of supporting schools across our state in advancing early literacy and equitable instruction. My connection to literacy runs very deep, coming from an underserved community, impoverished area myself, and understanding how literacy and reading was my first window into possibilities beyond what I saw in my community. And that early exposure shaped who I became as an educator and now as an advocate. And for me, the right to read isn't just about access to books, it's about access to representation, to belonging, to seeing students come in at kindergarten and knowing that they have the right and they belong in these spaces to be educated just like everyone else. And so when we're talking about literacy and representation, I want students to be able to see themselves in the world that they are learning about. And so every student deserves to experience that through text and the way that they learn how to read in schools.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sonover Wilkins. Like William said, I am the Democracy Projects Coordinator for Every Library. Every Library is a 501c4 organization that focuses on library ballot measures, historically working on tax levies and funding for libraries. But in more recent years, as we've seen increases to book bans and censorship around the country, we have been doing a lot of work with librarians and students on the ground in a number of different states to try and prevent these book bans and censorship and kind of understand how they've evolved over the years and what we can do to prevent it. And within that, we've been monitoring many state legislative sessions. So a lot of the work that we do is really focused on protecting students' rights by ensuring that they have access to library books and materials from diverse perspectives that represent the communities in which they live and represent their identities. And then we also work with students' rights groups in various states to make sure that their perspectives are at the forefront when we're thinking about book bans and censorship and who they impact and why. Outside of my work with Every Library, I have my master's in library and information sciences. And then I also work as a consultant with PEN America for their book ban index. So we do a lot of work tracking book bans and censorship across the country in different states at different school board levels. And then work to report and write about what's happening as we're seeing these instances rise in different places.
And hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ashlyn Curry. I'm a literacy consultant with Oakland Schools, where I get to work alongside district leaders, literacy coaches, and teachers to strengthen literacy instruction and to make sure every student has access to high quality, engaging reading and writing materials. Before this role, I spent about 17 years in the classroom teaching at both the elementary and middle school years. And those years really shaped how I think about literacy and seeing firsthand how powerful it is when students connect with text that spark their curiosity, make them question and wondering about the world that they live in, and they want to learn more. Before my role as a literacy consultant and a classroom teacher, I was also a university instructor. And what really drives me is helping students see themselves as readers and writers and helping them find joy and confidence and meaning in literacy.
I love that framing for how we should think about literacy. Skipper, as a former principal and instructional leader, you have a good perspective on the many considerations that schools and teachers face when it comes to curriculum adoption, particularly amid these sweeping changes that we're seeing to how literacy is taught in the country. So if you could talk about how these curricular choices shape student access to diverse represented texts.
So when you think about curriculum decisions, they are some of the most influential choices we make for students. It's literally what students follow and what they learn throughout the trajectory of their year and honestly their school years. And so I've been able to witness students firsthand engage with these materials, and these materials can either expand or limit students' mirrors and windows. I think oftentimes we spend a lot of time talking about high quality instructional materials, and we focus solely on like the alignment or the standards, but we don't think enough about students seeing themselves in what they are reading. When you think about students coming into kindergarten that's never been to school before, which is a lot of their realities for schools that I've served in as a leader, they're coming into a world that is uncomfortable or unknown to them. And so just as adults, if we go into a place that we've never been before, where first thing we're looking for is what feels like I belong here. What's familiar here? What can I connect to? And so it's simply seeing 5-year-olds coming in and having absolutely no idea of literacy, but also not feeling like they belong there because I don't see a representation of myself anywhere. And so as a Black leader, I understood where my students were coming from. And what I mean by that is the areas that they were living in, because I also lived in those areas. And so I knew how important it was to make sure that even if it wasn't in the curriculum materials, that I made sure I gave them opportunities and access and exposure to seeing themselves and belonging in school, which really helped them to shine. And so I think as districts adapt new curriculars and things change, especially with us pushing a lot around the science of reading movement, that we don't treat representation as an option. Because if all students can come to school, then all students need to be represented in what we are allowing them to learn in access and exposure. And so those texts will affirm students' identities and broaden their perspectives.
And you talked a little bit about how you made sure that students had those kinds of environments. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact of curricular materials on student engagement and literacy development?
So when you think about, as I said earlier, about as an adult, if we go into an unfamiliar place, and then we see something that we can connect to, even if it's something very small. You think about the spark that it has on you. You think about what it does to your nervous system. It calms you. It makes you feel like you belong. It makes you feel like you can trust the environment. And so when we think about underserved communities, impoverished communities with students that have very limited access and exposure, no fault of their own, and most of the time, no fault of their parents or their guardians as well, then we think about how do we as schools, something that is mandatory for them to do, to come to, how do we make sure that we provide those opportunities for every student to feel safe in a space that we say that they have to come to and learn about. Representative materials do more than just build literacy skills. It brings so much out of students. I have seen students be able to read books that literally reflect the color of their skin. And they're like, oh my God, she looks like me. Oh my God, I've seen that before. And when you think about kindergartners or students as we're shaping their minds and what we want them to feel, we want them to feel love. We want them to feel like they belong. We also want them to believe that they can read, that they should have access to everything that everybody else does. And so when we talk about what it has on student engagement, would you be that engaged when you're looking at a text every time you open up a book and you literally cannot connect to anything? You literally cannot even connect to the language, to the environment, or anything. I remember seeing students read books just as simple as like a mountain. They had never seen a mountain before. And so although those exposures help to teach them things, it's also thinking about how do we also make sure that they see themselves in that book standing by a mountain, and you see someone that has the same color of your skin or coming from the same communities that you come from representing in those spaces. And so at EdTrust, we see this as a part of our larger equity conversation, ensuring that every child has access to high quality, inclusive materials that both teach them how to read, but inspire them to believe that they deserve everything that we have been able to provide for everyone else.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think we understand a lot of this intuitively, but I think advocates are really eager for the research base behind this that demonstrates how diverse representation in books builds student comprehension, critical thinking, a sense of belonging, which you just described very clearly. Dr. Curry, can you share what you think are the most important research findings on access to diverse representation, specifically around literacy development? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And Skipper talked about some of those things. And what she was really naming is the work of Dr. William Sims Bishop, the work of Mirrors and Windows, which remind us that children from dominant social groups often see themselves reflected in books they read, while children from those marginalized groups mostly encounter window books and stories about others, they don't get a chance to read those books. But what's often overlooked is Dr. Sims Bishop's work from Shadow and Substance Study, where she analyzed African-American children's books, and she grouped them by their race and their color and what was portrayed. And she put them in 3 different categories. So I'm gonna go through those 3 categories. So the first category was the social conscious books, were books often written to help white readers understand the experience of Black people, though they sometimes reinforce those stereotypes, like the melting pot books, where race is a knowledge, but it's not deeply explored. I like to think of the Jabari tries or Jabari jumps. Those are what I consider like melting pot books. And the third type of category that Dr. Sims Bishop talked about is the cultural conscious books. They're written from an insider's perspective. They celebrate that authentic, that cultural experience, like Derek Barnes' book, Crown, an Ode to the Fresh Cut. So we want to make sure that when we are bringing literature in front of kids, that is really connected to people's experiences from an insider's perspective from an author. So I share all this because this work connects directly to 1988 study by Bell and Clark. And they had students read stories in these 3 categories, in these 3 groups. And while students can answer those basic literal questions, like the who are the characters, what did they do, they were able to expand on those culturally conscious stories or those African-American characters that had those culturally familiar themes. And just recently, Dr. Kathleen Clark in 2017, she showed that when African-American students engage with culturally relevant texts, they made greater literacy gains. So the research continues to affirm what we already know, that it's not just about representation, it's about visibility. It's directly tied to deeper comprehension, engagement, and achievement, and it really gets kids excited about reading.
Yeah, that's great. And as an early literacy consultant, can you talk about how you've used these research findings in your own work?
Yes. So knowing this research, it shaped how I created a curriculum called the 1, 2, 3 Rhythm to Read Summer Program. And it really creates a list of books that are written by African-American authors. We bring in hand clap games, we bring in jump rope rhymes. They're saying the rhyme of Mary Mac and Shimmy Shimmy Cocoa Pop. And it really helped beginner readers' stories to affirm their identity and make learning joyful while learning foundational skills like alphabet knowledge and phonological awareness. But we're really bringing their cultural experiences into those beginning to read spaces. Another way that we have engaged in this work is at Open Schools. We host the African American Read-In, where families celebrate the African American authors. And this year, we're excited to feature Kwame Alexander, and we partner with our local school districts across Oakland County. At the state level, I have the opportunity to serve at the Early Literacy Task Force, and we have created these essentials instructional practices that really guide our work in making sure kids have access to diverse texts. And I'm also a part of the culturally relevant pedagogy team, and we completed a book study reading of Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's book, Cultivating Genius, and we partner with her authors and coaches, and we created the Diverse Text Set Project Suite, which created these lesson plans that connect with our Michigan Social Studies units. So literacy coaches across the state are working alongside classroom teachers through these coaching cycles, and we've seen a real impact, and students are reading more, they participate more deeply in the classroom discussions. So you have access to that document.
Yeah, that's such great, really impactful work. And I want to turn this discussion back towards what I touched on in the earlier remarks about the censorship movement. Sonober, can you talk about how that movement has shifted over time from book bans that were really under the guise of parents' rights to what we're seeing now for efforts to impose Christian white nationalism in libraries and schools?
Yeah, so I think when people are thinking about censorship and book bans as a concept, they tend to think of it as entirely apolitical or separate from politics, that it exists without, that it doesn't exist within the same space. However, when we look at the research and the data behind who is banning these books and why, we can clearly see that correlation between white Christian nationalism and different political actors and their attempts to ban these books for politically motivated reasons because of the content within the books or the identity of the authors and voices within those books. And so recent attempts at censorship have really changed under this guise of parental rights, because we have seen these parents come out saying they want to protect children, and instead, we see that they're actually targeting books that feature marginalized communities, for example, LGBTQ+ themes or topics, and BIPOC characters and authors. And they're saying that they want to protect these children, and that this is this concept of parental rights. However, we know that not all parents think this, and it actually takes away the rights of some parents to choose what their own child is able to read when you're making this sort of blanket ban on books and materials and what all students have access to. So many parents do, want their children to have access to these diverse books and materials that represent these varying viewpoints. And most libraries and school districts actually already allow parents to restrict what their own child has access to. So the problem really comes when those same parents want to prevent the other people's kids from accessing those books and materials. And this is all despite the fact that most parents, we know from studies, have this inherent trust in librarians to make these curation decisions. So oftentimes you see these parents groups that are either funded by or work closely with white nationalist groups, and they will submit mass challenges in school districts and libraries across the country because of their political affiliations. And because they're submitting these mass challenges, it's hard, especially in underfunded school districts, for them to respond in a way that allows them to properly review each of the items that have been challenged. And so sometimes they are successful in getting these books banned. We also see that these book banners don't always live in the communities in which they're filing these challenges. So for example, I live in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, and in Texas, there are, over 1,500 school districts across the state. And you can see that there are these groups of traveling pastors who work with groups like Moms for Liberty and other politically motivated groups to challenge books across the state. And one shift that we've seen in recent years, especially, is this sort of rise in statewide legislation that bans or attempts to ban access to certain books and materials. And more recently, we've actually seen bills that attempt to criminalize librarianship, and it removes defenses against prosecution for both teachers and librarians, as well as mental health professionals. And so we see these same politically motivated actors who are submitting these mass challenges and trying to ban books at the school level, then also lobby for bills that would create restricted sections in libraries or lead to additional book bans in schools. And then recently, like I mentioned, criminalize librarians with jail time. So I hope that, people can see that this is a little bit more politically connected than they may think. And I hope they realize that most people don't want these books to be banned, and it's this small minority that's been really loud and very vocal in trying to make sure that students don't have access to these books and materials.
Yeah. I mean, this is clearly a very overwhelming and dangerous push from this small group. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some large-scale campaigns that there have been to push back against book bans, maybe a little hope in the darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a number of local coalitions as well as statewide organizations, and in some cases, school and state library associations to do a lot of the work on the ground. So for example, I mentioned Texas. We work with the Texas Freedom to Read Project, which is a group of local parents in major cities across the state. And we provide them with support and messaging and digital tools and resources so that they are able to go into these local communities and provide librarians and teachers and students with the support that they need to prevent additional bans from happening. And a lot of that happens by holding school board members accountable for the decisions that they're making and make sure that they follow their own policies that they have. But it also comes down to voting in local elections and realizing that a lot of these decisions are made by people that we vote for. So if we can protect and make sure that election integrity is there, especially at the school board level, then in some cases we can prevent further book bans from happening.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you focused not just on voting, but specifically thinking about school board elections too.
Yeah.
I know that everyone really thinks it's top of mind. And I want to open a question up to all of you. Just if you could leave advocates with one concrete step to champion access to diverse and representative text in an advocate state or district, what would that be? A small thing they could do right after this call, or a big thing? And maybe I'll just turn it back to Sanover since you were just talking about one example.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I think I say it's a small thing, but it's not a small thing. It's probably the biggest thing that you can do is vote, especially in local elections. A lot of the smaller community races are uncontested and are decided by a small minority of voters. So, doing your research, making sure you know what's on the ballot and who you're voting for and why, but making sure that you encourage everyone in your community to participate in elections is so important, especially at the school board level, because it impacts your entire community overall. So yeah, I think that's a small thing. And then a bigger thing would be, if you find out that your school library or your school district is currently challenging books or facing challenges from community members, then you can contact us to launch a local coalition in your community to protect the right to read. And that's done mainly through our Fight for the First platform, where we build local coalitions and help you build a list of supporters that you can call on to then speak before the school board at the next board meeting, take specific actions like signing a petition or sending an email to your school board representative, and making sure you know what types of policies are being passed at that local level so that you can really protect against future bans.
Great, thank you. And I know Emily is sharing some links to what our panelists are discussing in the chat. Dr. Curry, would you like to go next?
One of the things that when I was going through my research of African American children's literature in a classroom is the short lifespan of those books. And so if we can just purchase those books that represent the books that we want our kids to read and make sure they have access to.
Yeah, that's great. And Skipper?
I would say like a small step is really asking questions. And I think when parents begin to ask questions, it holds everyone accountable, school leaders, school board members, districts, asking questions like whose stories are our students reading? Who are my students reading about? Who are my students seeing? What are they experiencing? Whose voices are missing? Those simple questions, again, opens doors to everyone having accountability about what's being put in front of students. And it's questions that I think that school districts and board members are just not used to. And so it's really just about letting them know that, hey, we're all watching and we all want to know what is happening with our students and making sure that they are getting what they deserve. I think a big step is to join a coalition, as she mentioned, just about pushing states and district policies that require curriculum adoptions processes to prioritize representation alongside quality and alignment. It's not just about having something that is rigorous or high quality material, but also pushing the agenda to make sure that our Black and Brown kids feel a sense of belonging so that they are able to truly reach their highest achievement levels through literacy.
Yeah, that's great. And we often talk about how rigor is part of the definition of rigor is representation. Right? Those
Yes.
are key linked to each other. I think we're going to open it up to some questions if we have some in the Q&A.
Absolutely.
We
Yes.
have okay. We have one here about the impact of the Mahmoud versus Taylor decision that was recently passed. How has this decision affected student learning, access, and advocacy on this issue? Just open up to any of you that want to answer.
I mean, I can start off. I think the decision especially harms LGBTQ plus students around the country because it makes them it makes it harder for them to access classroom books that reflect their lived experience and their identities. And while the decision doesn't expressly apply to school libraries, as you touched on earlier, William, I think the concern is that librarians might self-censor books if they don't fully understand the ruling, or if they believe that it could, and if they could be held in any way accountable for providing books that contain those identities. And so I think it's something that teachers should definitely be concerned about, but I think librarians alongside them should be really concerned about this decision.
Any other thoughts about Mahmoud?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I think what's important is that we saw that after we had this decision, we saw changes in Montgomery County where this decision was based from. Very, very few parents actually opted out in the way that the decision passed. So back to Sanober's point about how many parents are actually asking for this and what is the effect on the majority of parents. Let's ask another Q&A. We have a question from Charlemar. We constantly say culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally relevant materials. Charlemar is asking what they can say as an advocate when giving public comment and meeting with policymakers to make it plain and clear. Any thoughts about that?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think the first step is definitely finding a state legislator or any sort of state aide who can kind of help you with doing some back channel conversations behind the scenes as you're forming policies. So, you know, if you're working with the school board to draft a policy that is representative of all identities and diverse viewpoints that reflect your community, then making sure that that is very clear when you're having conversations with them, and making sure that your perspective and viewpoint is heard. I hope that answers your question.
I would also add the connection to the teachers and like literacy coaches, the people who have a great experience or knowledge based on what's actually being represented in the schools. For example, the school that I was a principal of, K2, we had 90% African-American students. And you look at the first grade curriculum, the ELA curriculum, there was no Black or brown students represented in that ELA curriculum for the entire school year. And so just having those very clear factual points that literally aligns to the disconnection between what's happening with the curriculum and what students are seeing. So when you have a 90% of African-American students sitting in a K-8 building, then looking across the curriculums to see how many stories that they are required to read actually make them feel like they belong, actually push them to feel inspired to reach their highest achievement levels. So I think that's also one way to really just clearly align the message.
And I would add to that is when thinking about like what we learned from the diverse test set, that students from the dominant social group at this time really enjoyed the stories as well. Like a good story is a good story, and kids enjoy those books. When I think about the 1, 2, 3 Rhythm to Read program, which those books are from African-American authors, that took that same curriculum and was placed in the predominantly European-American school, and those kids enjoyed the books and experiences as well. And it was really cool to see those kids talk about, oh, I didn't know about the electric slide. I can do the electric slide, and just knowing about different cultures. And that goes back to those mirrors and windows and books that Dr. Sims Bishop talks about.
Yes. I think it also speaks to what's the message as a country we're sending our students, Dr. Curry, when you speak about that, because what message are we sending to students when this marginalized group is not represented at all and everybody else is? And so what are we teaching students at a young age about the sense of belonging for everybody in our country?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think this is really a messaging question as well. And I think it could be helpful to understand how districts or states are successfully incorporating representative materials, because that gives good evidence for pushback. Once we see like the practical evidence, can you talk about, any of you talk about efforts where we see successful incorporation of representative materials that you'd like to uplift? Maybe we kind of touched on that a little bit.
I mean, I know that different states like Vermont, Maryland, Colorado, Rhode Island, and Illinois have all been part of the process to draft a policy framework around the right to read and have passed right to read bills. And we've been a part of that conversation in ensuring that a part of that is making sure that the freedom to read is extended to all students, and that sometimes includes students from different backgrounds and maybe who aren't necessarily in a community but want to feel represented throughout society. And so I think those right to read bills are a somewhat successful, I mean, they're fairly new, but I think they've been successfully incorporated representative materials into these states, into the policy framework of these states. And so I think that's been great. But a lot of the examples I have are actually like the opposite, where you see books that are being banned because they have discussions around race and racism, immigration, and negative interactions with the police. You have discussions around refugees, around LGBTQ plus topics and identities, especially those of trans people in the country. And a lot of times they're banned because they contain content that alludes to those identities. And so unfortunately, like as we're doing content analysis and for PEN America and reviewing each individual title that's been banned across the country, we see time and time again, it's these books that have BIPOC individuals and LGBTQ plus voices that are being banned. I saw the other day that there was a book about queso that was banned. It was about the history of making queso, and it has recipes in it. And unfortunately, it just goes to show that in a lot of places, representative materials are not necessarily successfully incorporated into curriculum, into classroom libraries, into school libraries, because they are being challenged constantly.
Yeah. And I think this touches on something you were talking about before, just how partisan this push is. And we have a question from the audience. Some states are pushing partisan school board elections. How can we keep such banning policies from being partisan-based issues?
I think reminding people that this should not be a partisan issue. I think people tend to politicize it. And so, reminding people that library books are meant for everyone from all political perspectives and ideologies, right? We actually see books banned from both sides of the political spectrum, even though one side perpetuates it more than the other, doesn't mean that books from all political ideologies aren't banned. So just, reminding them that, there are diverse perspectives and political ideologies that are within this community, and we want to see all of them respected and represented within our schools. I think that can be a good reminder for people.
And one other question that I'm seeing in the chat is about metrics for helping decide about book bans. I just say, the question begins about legitimate book bans, and kind of we have a position at EdTrust that no book should be banned, right? There's some way to use any book, but bans and challenges are a regular part of educator and librarian choices now. So what are some metrics that they may be using?
Yeah, so I think it's important to clarify the difference between weeded material, which I think has existed for a very long time, and weeding policies are usually centered around low circulation materials and things like outdated information within books. And so a lot of times librarians and teachers will remove those titles because of those reasons, not necessarily because of the content contained with them. So one way to determine whether it's a weeded book versus a banned book is to, for example, look at the mass challenge lists that have been filed within a state or local community by these political representatives, and seeing if those same titles are then being weeded. A lot of times, in some cases in Florida, for example, we have seen that even though a book has been challenged, the school district has decided to retain the title in the school library or in the classroom library, but then we see like 6 months later it's weeded, and we can see that it's clearly motivated by these political actors or by librarians who are fearful for their jobs and their safety. And so they preemptively ban these books in an effort to sort of placate the person who's filing the challenges or these political actors who are behind them.
Skipper or Dr. Curry, I want to give you a chance in case you want to add on to this, but I think it's also relevant to think about metrics when we're thinking about looking at diverse materials in classrooms, if there's anything that helps guide you in that work as well. maybe that's just an opportunity for me to plug our tool for representational balance again. Things that you can, that anyone can
be banned. We shouldn't even have metrics.
Right? Definitely. Definitely. But if anybody wants to look at that tool, it's just something that we provide for teachers, but librarians, but really anyone can apply it to read a book and think about what the representation looks like, so we can really then evaluate decisions that we make about how we teach that book or how we include that book and talking with our kids. There is one other question here for Sonober. Sierra asks, she's interested in learning more about the coalition development across the country, and if you're available in every state, and if you could share the process if we want to learn more.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
students in your work. Sorry, there were multiple
So
questions.
let me drop a link into the chat. This is for our Fight for the First page. And Fight for the First is our coalition building tool and platform that allows people to organize in their local communities. So you can be a librarian or a teacher, or you can just be a concerned community member or parent who is noticing book bans and censorship attempts, or even threats to library funding across the country. And we work with you to develop messaging around this within your local area. We also have a number of statewide groups who have Fight for the First pages through our coalition. We are not active in every state. I want to say we're active in 34 states. And we're active basically where book bans are happening, but also where individual community members and parents have reached out to us asking us for help and assistance. So it may be that you have book bans in your community, but we just haven't connected yet. And so, you know, if you're in a state like Oklahoma, we'd love to connect with you. We haven't had anyone from there yet connect with us. But essentially how the coalition building process works is you write a petition and gather signatures. What we do is put money behind ads so that you can build your list of supporters in your local community. So say you're in Pasadena, California, we would send out a message with the petition to everyone in Pasadena, California on our list, and then also put some money behind ads on Facebook, for example, for local community members who live there about this issue, so that they are, one, informed about what's happening, but two, we can use that to then generate a call to action. So they can from there attend the next school board meeting. If the book bans are happening in a school library, they can show up and really know what the key talking points are and know what the messaging is behind why these books should not be banned, and be well prepared. And so as you're building that list of supporters, you're building a coalition in your local community, and then you can call on them to continue building these actions in the future.
Right. Perfect. What a great way to close our discussion. Thank you so much, Sonober, Skipper, and Dr. Curry. I will turn it back to Shana.
Great, thank you. Echoing what William just said, Sonober, Skipper, Dr. Curry, thank you so much for adding such needed perspective, resources, stories, all of which I think are so integral in this moment that William outlined. I have the unpleasant job of wrapping us up today, and to say thank you for joining us on this webinar. And so just a closing few pieces of business. And so if we're able to get the slides back up, great. If not, no worries. Charlamart asked in the chat if we'll be circulating all of this. Yes, we'll be circulating the slides and the resources, contact information, I believe, as well. And so if the slides aren't able to get back up, we will circulate that as well. Oh, perfect. Okay. So a few things on the EdTrust side. The first is that we outline sort of a vision for equitable literacy development for all students in our principles report. And so our second principle is about making sure that students are engaging and interacting with books and materials that connect to their identities and interests in all the ways that panelists were speaking to today. The second resource is around a blog series that we put out in relationship to the third image on the slide. talking about representation in books broadly, the ways in which identities are represented across a range of different identities, and the ways in which they're interacting with with other identities. So many lived experiences uplifted here, and really important reads. And then lastly, both of these are really credit to William's great work at EdTrust. EdTrust analyzed a set of books to think about not only the what of representation, but that how of representation, going back to what Dr. Curry was saying before in Dr. Sims Bishop's shadow and substance study, and found that, books are often not portraying students of color with agency, or historical events are getting whitewashed. And so it was a really strong call to action to be thinking about, again, the what, but also the how of representation as well. So we encourage you to check out all of those. And there's a tool for representational balance that William mentioned already on the line. So we encourage you to check that out. Lastly, we would love to hear how the session went for you. What worked, what didn't? What type of speakers do you like to have on the line with webinars? And so this will take you, I think, all of 2 minutes. If you're able to scan the QR code and quickly fill that out, that helps us out a lot. And then lastly, we have a newsletter through the Alliance for Resource Equity. This circulates upcoming events, resources, just news articles that we're reading that all relate to our toolkit or to our framework at the Alliance for Resource Equity. Also elevates resources such as these webinar series that we hold. So again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going with all of you, and have a great rest of your day.